Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today at what I believe is a critical moment, not just for the rule of law, but also our democracy. I'm Tim Crosland. I was, in fact, previously a government lawyer, a reform character, now working for the climate justice charity Plan B. We're here because of what's happening in this court behind us. People who are being tried for public nuisance, a serious criminal offence, are being told they cannot explain why they've done what they've done. They cannot tell the jury that their motivation for taking upon themselves serious personal risk was the protection of life on Earth, was the well-being of their fellow citizens. And if they do that, if they do explain their motivation, the judge is telling them they are in contempt of court for disobeying his edict, and he's sentenced one person to prison, David Nixon, a care worker, a wonderful, gentle person, and today we believe he's going to do the same thing to 2 more people. And it's a historic moment that we've got lawyers from across our profession today to come and stand together to talk about what this means. We have a leading international lawyer, Farhana Yasmin. It's a great honour to have her here. People may or may not know that without Farhana, I think things we take for granted today about the response to the climate crisis, 1.5 degrees net zero, we wouldn't have those at all if it wasn't for Farhana. We have Jodie Blackstock, a leading human rights barrister from Garden Court Chambers, a former legal director of justice, and Monika Sobiecki, a partner from Bindman's, probably the most prestigious human rights law firm in the country. So that's an extraordinary turnout, given the time that we've had. I want to say something about the people who are not here, because the messages from leading lawyers, such as Michael Mansfield, couldn't be here because he's in Belfast. He sent us a quote. We've had a member of the House of Lords wishing he could be here today, but wasn't able to be here today. And a number of other leading counsel and lawyers. They're with us in spirit. They're thinking of us. One other group of people who are not here, the media, those who are meant to stand up when our rights are in danger. My understanding, forgive me if I've got this wrong, but I think it's important to say it, is The Guardian, who've been reporting this story, were here in court on Wednesday when Gio and Amy mentioned climate change, and Judge Reid said, I am suspicious about your presence here just when this contempt is happening. Maybe you're in contempt of court too. And The Guardian's lawyers have now told their journalists not to be here. So that is the situation we're in. That is why it is so important we shine a spotlight on these abuses. Just want to say a tiny bit more before I hand over about why this is happening. I think we all know it is wrong. It's deeply wrong, not just morally, legally. What's the point of a jury if we don't trust them with the evidence, if we're going to usurp their role? What does a right to a fair trial mean if you can't speak and explain why you did what you did? What does freedom of expression mean if you're gagged with a threat of prison just for explaining yourself? But it's not enough to notice, to be outraged that it's wrong. Why is it happening? I would suggest it is not a coincidence that when juries do hear the evidence of climate breakdown and the government's inertia, they're acquitting over and over again. When judges speak out from their humanity and talk of their admiration for protesters, the right-wing press crucifies them. And what we're seeing here is the other reaction, because this is politically so explosive, and we're seeing that played out all the time. There's a deeper reason. Suppression of evidence is at the heart of the climate crisis. We've known about this for decades. The fossil fuel companies, who in 1980s, we've got the minutes of their meetings, are thinking they're going to get away with it because nobody's actually going to see the evidence for another 20 years. And that's another 20 years of profits if they can just keep this quiet. Suppression of evidence. I know from Sir David King, former government's chief scientific advisor, he was going to go public before the Paris Agreement with his risk assessment and was blocked from doing it by a special advisor at 10 Downing Street who was nervous of alienating the Murdoch press. So the suppression of evidence is the real story here, and that's what's happening in these courts, and we can't let it go. It's a threat not just to the rule of law, but our democracy. If there's one thing that all of us have in common, it's the will to survive, the desire to pass on the flame of life undimmed. And the carbon economy could not go on if people had good information and good evidence. People having that information is a threat to the law firms in the City of London who are making vast profits from the carbon economy. So, let's just ask ourselves the question here. Why is this happening? Thank you. And Farhana, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much to all of the people here. And I just want to say a huge thanks to all of the activists who have been involved all over the world, and especially to the ones in the UK who are now standing trial as a result of, already in prison in some cases, for what they've been doing in the last 3 or 4 years, which has really put the spotlight on what this government has failed to do. I'm, as Tim has very kindly said, I am also a government lawyer, but my governments were the small island states that I advised for nearly 30 years on and off, including the Marshall Islands, who I advised for 6 years in the run-up to the Paris Agreement and afterwards. And my actions came as a result of the whole-scale breach of law and the lack of compliance, the lack of urgency, the lack of listening to the legal limits, which we finally had got negotiated and agreed and put in a legally binding treaty, especially the 1.5 degree limit, and especially the goal of net zero by 2050. I know some people think that's too lax and too vague, but actually you have to understand that back in 2013 when we were starting the negotiations, there was no limit whatsoever. So having a limit and putting that in place 10 years ago was again a battle that was fought and won by the small island states, by civil society, by activists, against the huge corporate and elite influence of the fossil fuel industry and many of the countries that are very directly dependent on that. So the might of power that is being thrown at avoiding the evidence, avoiding acting on the evidence. I think the evidence has been in plain sight since 1991 when the first IPCC report came out and the second report came out leading to the Climate Change Convention in 1992. It's the evidence that's been continually ignored and shunted aside by those in power. And that's what made me join the rebellion back in 2019. That's what makes me still convinced that we have got a tough battle on our hands. I feel sad that the legal profession is not doing a better job at advising on liabilities, at advising on what are the real legal implications for companies, for countries, for everyone. I wish also that the in-house councils were here to really properly look at and advise properly on their fiduciary duties of directors, of the finance industry, as you say, because the law is there to protect us. It's just that that's not being done in the right way. And sadly, the people who are telling the truth about that are now the ones who are bearing the cost of their own liberty. So my heart goes out to them. I really salute them. We're all here to support you in whatever way we can. And I really hope that the judges who are giving this inconsistent and I think completely wrong, frankly, direction to juries and deeply, in denial about what is happening to democracy and the rule of law, I hope that they will listen to what is really needed at this time from their legal training. Frankly, myself, I really hope that we can appeal to them all, and I hope that more consistency can be found, because as has become very, very clear, when juries and ordinary people and magistrates hear why these actions have happened, they are in general sympathetic, and juries are trying their best to balance the fact that our governments are not doing enough, the elites are not doing enough, the fossil fuel industries are not doing enough. So I guess I just want to end by saying, it's not just the people of this country, but, many vulnerable people and those who are counting on action being taken really support what's going on here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farhana. It's so wonderful to have you here. Jodie.
Thank you. We're here today because there is a climate emergency. That climate emergency has been accepted by government, accepted by Parliament, accepted by councils across the country. But it is not clear what's being done about it. We're here because a number of people so affected by that lack of urgency, lack of change, lack of action, took their own action to try and get a message across. That message was that things need to be done. Things need to change. We need to put the brakes on what is looking like the end of our civilization, not hundreds of years in the future, but in the next decades. And for some people, it is already happening. That message is something that those people, well aware that they are likely to be tried for, would want to communicate as their motivation to the jury of their peers. They have a right to an effective defence. Anybody accused of crime has a right to an effective defence. And being silenced on the motivation for their actions, being silenced on what might demonstrate credibility, what might be relevant to the evidence on the individual facts of each case, is, in a lot of people's views, a breach of the right to a fair trial. And it is concerning that in a country where we respect human rights, we respect rights of due process, that we're in a situation today where people who did not feel able to keep their silence because they wanted to communicate to their jury are now facing potential prison sentences for simply speaking out. The system in this country is trial by jury, trial by lay people as a tribunal of fact. And that tribunal of lay people is there to look at all the evidence and determine whether it is fair, lawful, morally correct to find a person guilty of a crime. They do that on the direction of a judge having heard all the evidence. But if they haven't heard the evidence from the person that they are trying, how can they possibly come to the correct decision? That is why I'm here today, and that is why it is concerning we are starting to see this kind of decision appear. Because a fundamental right to defend yourself, even if in law the defence may be hard to make out, is still a fundamental right. And being silenced on that at a time when protest rights are already under threat is a real dangerous route to go down. Thank you. Well said.
Thank you so much, Jodie. And I'm going to pass on now to Monika.
Thanks, Tim. So this speech is in honour of David Nixon and all those defendants, represented and unrepresented, who are finding it difficult to comprehend what's happening to them and indeed what's happening in this building behind me. In a climate crisis where courts blithely carry on with business as usual, while we enter an unprecedented period in human history where our atmosphere is hotter than at any point since the start of human civilization, and the sixth mass extinction threatens the ecosystems that our life depends on, it's important to remember that justice should not be an academic exercise. It's a fundamental part of justice that it should be understood by the people, especially those that it is meted out to. This is particularly important in our court system, which has been stripped to the bone, our legal aid system, which has been completely ransacked, and where unrepresented litigants face the might of the state bearing down on them. The novelist Franz Kafka wrote a visionary story over a century ago about an ordinary person arrested and tried for unspecified crimes, unable to make sense of the process in which he's ensnared. And just as in Kafka's The Trial, it is possible to say of the dystopian case that's facing our climate defenders here, it is an essential part of the justice dispensed here that you should be condemned, not only in innocence, but also in ignorance. If justice is not understood, and it's just for show, to appease some sort of authoritarian political appetite, then that is not a trial. That is a show trial. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monika. And it just feels so important to have lawyers from across the profession here right now. I'm just conscious we don't know what's happened yet in court. And we want to be there. I think we want to bear witness to that if possible. So maybe we just stop now, because we're not going to be silenced, but try and get into court if we can. Well, thanks again, everyone, and we will not be silenced.